We're both partners in the technology transactions section at Mintz Levin. And our job is to help our clients, both startups and entrepreneurs, and also more well-established clients, make good licensing deals. And by our standards, a good licensing deal is one that maximizes opportunity and minimizes risk for both parties. For startups, negotiation of a good deal is a lot about leverage. That's not a surprise to anybody who's negotiated a lease or a house sale or anything. It's about leverage. And as a startup company, for you to get a deal with a well-known brand name company is an excellent way to validate your technology and your business model. The trick is, how do you take advantage of that opportunity and not give away too much? And that's the gist of what we're going to focus on here today. So what we thought we would do is we're taking a fact scenario. We have a company in the health IT space, a digital health company called Health Rewards. Health Rewards has a technology that's based on research, on behavior modification research. They have an algorithm that was developed based on research that shows that when you give reward points and health advice or health content at strategic intervals, that will actually help with medication adherence. Sue Shen is the founder of Health Rewards. She's a Columbia grad student. She has a goal of getting a strategic deal with a large company. She has a bunch of potential partners in mind. You know, one is possibly a pharma company that might be interested in medication adherence because it will help increase sales. She's interested in looking at health insurers, providers that are interested in managing chronic diseases and are also interested in medication adherence. She's also open to talking to national drugstore chains who also would be interested in medication adherence because it increases drug sales. So Sue goes out, just like a lot of startups do, and she's going to speak on startup panels and talk about her company. She's at an industry conference, and she meets Rick Callahan. There's no picture of Rick yet. Rick Callahan is the VP of a mega national drugstore chain. He's out scouting for technologies, and he is super excited about what Health Rewards has. This is a typical scenario. We're going to keep going with some of the facts, and then we're going to get into some details on the legal stuff.
Great, thank you. So Rick Callahan goes back to headquarters and gets everyone excited about Sue's technology. And he gives Sue a call and tells her, good news, folks here want to hear what you have to sell. Sue is invited to do a demo at big company headquarters. Being the savvy entrepreneur that she is, Sue sends Rick her company's mutual non-disclosure agreement and asks Rick to sign it before she presents the demo. Now, this is a really important practice, especially for emerging companies. You've probably all seen a non-disclosure agreement at some point in your career, and it essentially protects the disclosure of information between two parties. A mutual agreement is put in place when both parties are exchanging confidential information. We also occasionally see one-way NDAs that protects only one of the party that's disclosing information. So Sue sends Rick the mutual NDA in this case because she is going to disclose confidential information of health rewards, and she knows that during the meeting, big companies also going to disclose information that's confidential to health rewards. One thing to remember about NDAs is that they will not protect you in every scenario. So while NDAs are very important, and it's a practice that you should engage in before disclosing confidential information, you also have to disclose with caution. And you have to be mindful about the information that you disclose, especially at this stage in the discussions. Certainly don't disclose your source code, for example, if you're a software company. And also don't disclose your secret sauce until you have at least a definitive agreement, a commercial agreement that's signed between the parties. Another really important point to remember, when you prepare a demo of your product, be strategic. There are certain things that you might want to disclose at this point in the discussions, that, certain appealing things about your technology, but there are also things that may be better disclosed a little bit later in the discussion, such as, sort of quirks that you're working out in your source code, for example, or in your product. So the presentation goes well. And at this point, Rick sends Sue a term sheet. They're ready to talk about business. So we'd like to talk to you a little bit why term sheets are helpful and how you can use them to your advantage. Certainly, term sheets are useful because they help iron out very important deal points. They also show the level of commitment of the big company in this case. And it's really always really fun for lawyers to be involved in a deal at this stage, because this is the stage where the guts of the deal are worked out. And this is where really important terms like license scope and exclusivity, fees and payment terms, and the term of the contract and IP ownership are all worked out. One important thing to remember is that while term sheets are non-binding, other than confidentiality provisions and governing law provisions, they do set the tone for the rest of the negotiation. And again, this is the time when some of the most important terms of the agreement are negotiated. And it's probably going to be more difficult to go back and change these later on.
So Sue gets a term sheet from big company, from Rick, and she's disappointed because big company at this point is only interested in doing a 6-month proof of concept at 5 of its stores on Long Island. So let's just pause a minute and think about what the pros and cons of these proof of concept or pilot deals are, because they're very common for startups when they're dealing with big companies. On the one hand, you could think, well, it's great, it's a way in. It's an easy way in the door, it's a soft start, a lower commitment for the big company. That's good. On the other hand, pilots, which they're often called, they don't always get the attention of a big company. Sometimes they just end up kind of floating under the radar. They're also not always designed to showcase your product in the best light possible. Big companies will come to you with that, and you have to think about, my product, my business model, does this work? Does this make sense? And you need to be a partner with the big company in designing that and thinking about what it is, what structure makes most sense. In this case, too, the big company requested exclusivity. And exclusivity at this stage, and we'll talk more about exclusivity later, but exclusivity at this stage certainly is not a good idea. It certainly would be for closing opportunities for health rewards. So Sue is really persistent on this issue, and she succeeds in getting big company to agree to a longer term contract. She pushes back because she knows that her product will showcase best over a longer term, and that 6 months won't be the right amount of time for her to get the best bang and show the best profile to big company. So they agree in the term sheet that they're going to have a longer term with a slower ramp up in the first year and then a fuller rollout when they get into the second year and into later years. So that's all good. So we got the term sheet agreed. Rick comes back to Sue. Congratulations. Here is big company's 80-page template contract. He sends an email to Sue. This is our standard form. It's been customized to reflect the term sheet. We hope that you can look it over and sign it tomorrow. You know, our EVP is really eager to announce the deal at the HIMSS Industry Conference next month. Sue fortunately knows better than that, and she brings along the contract to her lawyer. So what we're going to do, oh, by the way, guess what her lawyer said? Whoa, wait a minute. Time pressure tactics, all-time favorite of big companies. They like to push you as quickly as possible with the hope that you're not going to read the contract. So Sue's lawyer, Meg, says, look, tell them we need a significant time to review this big fat pile of paper, and we're going to get back to them when we've done that, and we're going to identify for you. She knows already, Meg, that the contract has several deal breaker issues. She's already identified those. So she's going to make a list for Sue and sit down and discuss it with her, and that's what we're going to do with you now.
You all have in front of you one of the handouts. This is the second handout. This is what Meg, Sue's lawyer, pulled together for her. It's a list of 8 contract provisions, what Meg calls potential deal breakers. And what you have in front of you is actual contract language. Now, we didn't take this from a contract. We actually drafted it for you, so you see what it looks like. And I think it would be fun if we go through it together and try to identify what the issues are. So if you want to take a minute and look at the first provision, scope of license. Do any of the words here seem problematic to you? Does anyone see any deal breakers here?
Irrevocable. Irrevocable license.
Irrevocable license, absolutely. That's a good one.
Royalty free.
So what does irrevocable license mean?
Can't terminate.
You cannot terminate, that's right. So especially when you see perpetual and irrevocable license, it means that big company has the right to use it forever, ever. Even if they breach the contract, even if they don't pay the fees, if they don't meet their obligations, they basically have your technology forever. Now, you know, this Health Rewards is a software company. You haven't given them the source code, potentially, yet. We'll get to that point. But a perpetual and irrevocable license versus a license that is granted for the term of the contract and is revocable if the other party breaches, it's definitely problematic. And it means that you give the other party essentially almost a part of your company.
I just want to say one thing, that from the big company's perspective, I would want an irrevocable license because I'm going to invest in this technology. I'm going to take it and roll it out in my company, and I want to make sure you can't yank it away from me.
Right. Any other issues that you see with the language? Some of the other words? Exclusive. So why is that a problem?
It's going to go away with anybody else.
That's right. So an exclusive license will block you from any other sales and potentially from using the technology yourself, especially if you have a patent on it. And it really would serve the opportunities for Health Rewards to commercialize this product. And at this early stage of the company, as Julie said earlier, exclusivity is probably not a good idea, unless you're handsomely compensated for it. Very, very well compensated. And it should probably just be for a certain period of time, not perpetual and irrevocable. Anything else? Yes, sir.
All the intellectual property.
That's right. That is a big problem. So in addition to asking for a perpetual, irrevocable, worldwide, throughout the world, royalty-free license, big companies, to the software, big companies also asking for the same very broad license to all of the underlying intellectual property. So that's a very broad license, and it really goes beyond the commercial deal that was struck at the term sheet stage. So you can see some of the problems already, and sort of the very broad scope and sort of the all-grabbing attitude that big company has.
Item 2, the ownership of improvements clause on your handout. And this one too has got this one's heavy on the legal gobbledygook. But Health Rewards is acknowledging and agreeing that all right, title, and intellectual property interest, and then here are a bunch of the key words, into any improvements, modifications, and or customizations to the software will be owned by big company. Is there any thoughts on what's problematic with that? So you're in with the big company, you're doing some development with them, and everything that arises, anything new, any changes to the product, all of those would be owned by big company and not by Health Rewards. And that will be a hindrance for you when you move on and you want to sell your software or your technology, your product to another company, because you won't have full ownership of the product. And for those of you who have negotiated deals like this with large companies before, they're often pretty arrogant about the value that they bring to the table. They think that, of course, if you're going to be doing business with us, we have years of experience. This national drugstore chain thinks it knows everything about patients and medication adherence and medication schedules, and they believe that the value that they're going to bring by collaborating with the startup company is going to much increase the value of the product. And often, they have an overinflated sense of what it is that they're bringing to the table. And most importantly, though, if you give away your IP, this is your core asset. In addition to your employees, it's your core asset, and you don't want to give it away, especially not inadvertently with a clause like this.
So let's take a look at the third provision that you have in front of you. Termination for convenience and fee increases. So maybe let's take term, the first sentence. The agreement commences on the effective date and it expires 5 years from the effective date. Maybe we should read that coupled with the last sentence. The fees and the rates set forth in the agreement shall be fixed during the term. So let's look at these two together because they are related. For a startup company, a longer term is typically beneficial. It sort of guarantees a long-term revenue stream, and it also shows commitment on the part of the big company. Unless pricing is fixed during the entire period of the contract, or there are commitments on the part of the smaller company that are burdensome for a startup, like really complex support obligations. So even a non-exclusive deal can feel like an exclusive deal if the small company has to use all of its resources and all of its time to now perform its obligations under the contract with big company. Also, 5 years is a long time not to be able to increase your fees. Inflation still happens in the world, costs go up, and this might turn into a deal that's no longer a good strategic deal, but a deal where a small company actually loses money and can potentially run out of money. So this is something that's really important to consider.
And I'm thinking about the folks from the medical center licensing office whom I met earlier, and I think in therapeutics, terms are different. They're often longer, right?
Now, we also program perpetual irrevocable licenses with a 5-year term.
Mm-hmm. You would.
But not.
You would not, right, exactly.
Exactly.
And also think if it were exclusive too. I mean, 5 years would seem like quite an eternity for this type of company, but it does vary depending on what the context is and the type of product.
Even a 5-year non-exclusive will prevent you from providing exclusive to another company.
There you go. Great
That's
point.
That's right. The second sort of troublesome provision here is big companies' right to terminate the agreement for convenience without any penalty or without any further obligation to health rewards. Julie and I represent a lot of big companies, and I can tell you that a lot of our clients are very passionate about having the right to terminate for convenience, especially when dealing with an emerging company. They're worried about whether or not this product is going to be successful, how it's going to affect their reputation, and they also don't want to have an obligation to pour a lot of money into this new technology. So they want to have the right to get out of the contract at any time. In fact, sometimes they have a mandate from the executive team to do so. As a startup, though, don't assume that this is a standard contract term. And you should really think twice when you see a provision like this in front of you. As a startup, it really diminishes the value of the contract for you. If this is a strategic deal for you, your first deal or a very important deal, by giving the big company the right to walk away at any time without any further obligation to you or without any type of payment, it's really like having no deal at all. And investors are not going to look favorably upon this, or potential buyers. So if big company insists that they have to have a right to terminate for convenience, make sure that you negotiate a termination for convenience fee that gives you the value that you would have received from this deal, or at least a major portion of that value.
So termination generally is one of the most contentiously negotiated issues in these transactions. And what's funny about the contracts is often, termination is buried in the back of the agreement. And but it's one of those things that you really have to think through carefully what happens when there's a termination, of what happens to your technology, what happens to your IP, what happens to the resources that you've brought on board in order to fulfill the obligations that you have to the big company. So when we move often from these discussions about termination for convenience, there's often then a consideration by the parties of what circumstances actually do justify a termination by a big company. And this very long 80-page contract, of course, has every termination right possible. One of the most common ones when big companies are dealing with startups is the right to terminate upon a change of control. So if you look at clause 4, this change of control, does everybody know what that means, or does anybody know what that, can someone define that for me? You can see I wasn't a professor. Yeah. Well, it's really just a term of art. For we lawyers, that means a change in ownership of a company, and that can occur through a sale of stock, or through a sale of the assets of a company, or through a merger, or there are other ways too. But so, what do you think would be tough for Sue in looking at this? If she knows that she gets an offer, if she gets an offer to sell the company, and then this national drugstore chain, which is the core of her business, has the right to terminate. If she closes that deal, that sucks the value out of her company. There's also a provision in here that gives the big company the right to consent to the change of control. And while you can understand from big companies' perspective, if ownership is changing of Health Rewards, and they would want to know who they're dealing with. You know, the acquirer could be a competitor of Health Rewards. It could be a party with whom big companies work with before and just doesn't like. It's not a good collaborator for them. So it makes sense from big companies' perspective. But on the other hand, for Sue and for a startup company, having to get the consent of another party before they can go forward in a sale of assets or merger transaction is going to be an obstacle. It's going to be a time sink, it's going to cost money, and it gives the big company the opportunity to influence the terms of the deal and maybe even tank the deal if they decide that they don't like that party. So again, this is something, it'll be a tough one to negotiate around, but as we keep saying here, that these are not terms that are necessarily terms that you have to agree to. You have to think in the context of your business plan, the trajectory, your trajectory for growth, your strategy, whether these terms make sense.
That's right. So issue number 5, and this is a really short provision of the agreement. You can see the footnote with the definition of insolvency event, but essentially, big company wants the right to terminate the contract and get a copy of the source code for the software if the startup is insolvent. And we've given you a definition of, sort of a standard definition of insolvency event that larger companies like to put in their contract. Doesn't mean it's a market definition, but it's just there to show you what this definition would look like in a contract that's favorable to big company. Does anyone know what a source code escrow is? No. So when you're a software company and you're dealing with a licensee that uses your product as a critical product in running their business, the licensee will often ask for a source code escrow right. And what that means is the source code for your software is placed in escrow with an independent third party that holds it safe and secure. And upon certain events, the source code release is triggered and the other party gets a copy of your source code. Now, their right to use the source code is typically governed by a source code license that's included in the underlying agreement. And there's a process of releasing the source code between the 3 parties that's also typically governed under a source code escrow agreement with the escrow agent, the licensor, and the licensee. In this case, the trigger that we've put in the provision is an insolvency event. So if Health Rewards, in this case, is unable to pay its debts in the ordinary course of business as they become due, or they actually go bankrupt, they have to release the source code to big company. Why do you think big company wants a source code escrow right? Yes, ma'am.
Probably because their business can't function if they don't have this software running.
That's right. So that's the primary reason why a licensee would want a source code escrow right, where they become dependent on the other party's software to run a business or a business unit that's important to their general operations. And it's really a risk mitigation strategy. I mean, the reason why big companies' contract is 80 pages is because it's full of various risk mitigation strategies. And this is one way in which they're mitigating the operational risk. It doesn't mean that you have to give them a source code rate. It also doesn't mean that you have to agree to the release conditions that they put in front of you. The release conditions and the source code license are really critical, and I would advise you to pay very close attention to those and to make sure that, again, you're not giving away your crown jewel to a licensee free of cost. So this is a very important provision that you should pay careful attention to when you see source code rights.
Right, and imagine the scenario if, oh, please, go ahead.
In the case of a bankruptcy,
Mhm.
isn't the source code one of the assets? So is that clause honored by the courts?
That's an excellent question, and it often is if there's the appropriate language in the contract that invokes 365N.
That's right. And you typically see it, you see source code escrow
Of the
rights
bankruptcy code.
coupled with 365N language, which says that the source code license is going to survive bankruptcy and it will receive 365N protection. We didn't get into that here, but you typically see them hand in hand.
Right, and
For those
that's an
reasons.
excellent question.
Yeah.
Mhm. But one of the risks with the source code escrow, and as with any asset, so you can imagine that this could happen with a number of assets, be it source code or some other integral, very sensitive information that a startup company has and keeps to itself, but that the big company would want to have access to in the event that the startup goes away. But one of the situations that could happen is, there are disputes always in the implementation phase or the development phase of a product between two parties. And if the big company, which is basically the sole source of revenue at the outset for the startup, if the big company is in dispute and doesn't pay, that could drive the startup company into bankruptcy or into an insolvency situation, which then would trigger the release of the source code, and then the big company gets the source code for free. We don't want that to happen, please.
So I'm curious, since most software is cloud-based,
Another excellent question. So we are in our, and we should have said this at the outset, in our scenario, we're talking about an on-premise software solution, and those still exist. They're still prevalent, but you're right that there are many software implementations that are provided on a hosted basis.
Yeah, and in fact, we do see now, I mean, we do a lot of SaaS deals, software as a service, or infrastructure as a service, or PaaS, platform as a service. And we have seen an increase in source code escrow arrangements, even for cloud-based software, where it's a critical system that a company uses as sort of a backbone for its operations. So there are escrow agents that actually have a service now for cloud-based software escrow, and they run a mirror image of that system for you. What's really important to remember with source code escrow is that, as you can see in the definition we've given you, insolvency event is not defined just as bankruptcy. It's defined as a situation, one of the prompts is becomes insolvent, lowercase I, or fails to pay debts or perform its obligations in the ordinary course of business. So that's a really low standard, right? So if they can no longer pay their debts because they're not getting paid by the company for the implementation, that would essentially trigger a source code release. So pay particular attention to these.
So let's take a look at the payment terms that are proposed by big company. That's in item 6 on your handout. So just to go through this once quickly. So we're saying, that in consideration of the licenses and the rights that we're giving you, big company will pay a license fee and a service fee for the professional services that they're providing. And those will be paid as follows. 5% of the fees up front when we sign the agreement, 10% of the fees paid on the date when the big company commences user acceptance testing, 20% upon go live, which we've defined below, and then a whopping 65% of the fees paid upon final acceptance. So what do you think Sue thinks of these payment terms? So they're backloaded, right? Pretty heavily backloaded. So that's problem number one. So most of the fees here, 65% of them, are only paid after final acceptance of the product, and not even after final acceptance, but 6 months after. Well, it doesn't say that here. I guess that's in go live or in the footnote.
Yeah.
So who bears the risk here of a failed implementation? It's going to be health rewards, because so much of the payment of the fees is backloaded. Now, of course, again, we understand that big company thinks this is terrific, and they think it's justified, because they don't want to put money out until they know that everything is done properly. And why should they pay before they know that? On the other hand, if things don't go well, it might not be the startup's fault. And so there needs to be a better balance in the payment terms. Also, startup company might simply need the funds in order to be able to do the work. They have to pay their people. So it simply might not work for Sue in this scenario, having these types of payment milestones. Another issue with these milestones, if you look at what are the triggers for payment. So one of them is, number 2, is that the fees will be paid when big company commences user acceptance testing. And that's an example of an event that Health Rewards has no control over whatsoever. I mean, big company could get involved in other things and just decide that they no longer have the resources or no resources at that point in time to engage in the acceptance testing. And therefore, Health Rewards, even though it's been performing, they wouldn't get paid. So ideally, what would be the best set of payment terms for Health Rewards? Yeah, exactly. 100% upfront would be nice, right? Right. But also, you want some certainty. Date certain would be a terrific milestone schedule for payment for Health Rewards. We'll pay you 25% on March 1st, 25% on May 1st. Then we know when we're getting paid. In many contracts like this that actually have a development component, the big company would want some kind of user acceptance testing or some kind of testing that will validate and verify that they're getting what they paid for. And those criteria, you can see here that if you look in the fine print, that we define user acceptance, a big company defined it to mean when they decide that it's accepted in their sole discretion. And that's what you'll see when you get this big company contract template first. That's what they'll ask for. And so we know that what would be fair would be a set of objective acceptance criteria that you model together and that you can both verify, and that would be a final point in time for you to get paid the rest of the funds.
So our fact scenario doesn't involve the prosecution of a patent or development of
because
patents.
it's software. So,
But
It is one of the issues to be discussed. The
the potential licensee, then who's going to pay for all this?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, right, right. And so it is most common that the licensee would cover that expense.
So we have two more issues here. Limitation of liability. So if you look at the language, it's probably going to look like a foreign language to most of you. This is a highly negotiated provision, and lawyers spend many hours drafting and negotiating these provisions, but it really has a very important business significance because a limitation of liability clause really informs the parties and a court how much liability each party is taking under the contract. And from our perspective, every contract that you enter into should have a limitation of liability clause that says, I will only be liable up to X amount for anything that happens under this contract. For a startup company, I think this is one of the most important provisions of the contract. And while lawyers work with their clients to analyze the exposure and the risk that the deal is going to bring to the startup, it is ultimately a business decision of how much money you essentially want to put on the table and how much you want to ultimately be liable for under the contract. There are really, many scenarios that you can look at here. And if we look at health rewards and big company, given that the product is going to be used for medication adherence and it's going to affect human lives, we could argue that the risk would be a pretty high risk that health rewards or big company could get sued for a sort of a medical damages action or even wrongful death. So there could be potentially high damages, and health rewards is certainly looking at this provision carefully, and Sue wants to limit her liability under the contract to a certain monetary amount that she and her board are comfortable with.
So the clause itself doesn't limit health rewards liability at all. The clause only limits the liability of big company, right? If you look at it. And from big companies' perspective, they feel like, well, if health rewards causes damages, if their product doesn't work and it impacts my business, if it results in patient harm, if it results in an exposure of patient health information, very sensitive information that's highly regulated, or the use of it is highly regulated, those could be big costs for a big company. And so why should they limit liability when it was health rewards' fault? It's a question of fairness, right? And that's exactly what it's not. It's not a question of fairness. A limitation of liability is a line in the sand, and it's a business decision that the parties are making to say, this is it, this is all we'll ever be liable for as a result of this transaction, and that any losses or damages over and above that, that's a shared risk. So if it's limited at whatever, $5 million, $3 million, if there are $10 million of damages that are caused by health rewards and suffered by big company just has to take care of that itself. And that's the limitation of liability clauses are intended to provide predictability for companies when they're entering into these transactions, because otherwise it would be very difficult to do their business. The last issue, so this is number 8 on our handout, and this clause says that health rewards acknowledges that the terms of the agreements are deemed to be confidential information of big company. And it also prohibits health rewards from using the name or the trademark of big company in any way without big company's permission. So why is that a problem for Sue?
We're
Branding, exactly. Exactly. So what the value of this deal to Health Rewards will be, once she lands a deal with this national drugstore chain and she can use their mark and say, I have a deal with whatever it is, Rite Aid, CVS, Walgreens, that's a huge bang for her. And that creates enormous value for her in her company. And if big company is telling her, no, you can't use my name at all, then she's not going to be able to reap the value. So what does she do? Often we see clients who will negotiate these clauses back so that they get the big company to agree at the time of signing the contract that they'll do a press release with the startup company. And that press release is going to have to wind its way through the approval process of the big company. There's no way of avoiding that. But at least you can get a commitment from them that you can make a public announcement. And then also you want to be able to talk about this. When Sue's going out and speaking to investors, she wants to be able to say, she might do a PowerPoint like this and she wants to put the logo up. This is strategic for her and important. And so she's going to need to get some ability to use the big company's name for publicity purposes. She's also not going to like the fact that the terms of the agreement are deemed confidential information of big company, because she's going to need to disclose the terms of the agreement to her investors, to potential acquirers, and other parties, maybe even some strategic partners. So that's going to also be an important term to renegotiate, because otherwise it will inhibit her ability to do other deals and get financing. So these were what Meg, her lawyer, deemed to be the deal breaker points. We pulled out 8 of them. I think there's probably 500 in the 80-page contract template.
Still a question about liability. So who determines the liability? So in this scenario, you have big company who's patient and customers. Probably they're going to sue big company. They're not going to sue health rewards. Does that make a difference, or how does that work?
Right. So it does. So who determines the liability in terms of what in any given case would most likely be something that would be the result of either a litigation or a settlement. So let's just say that there was a claim by a patient and it was determined that the parties are liable for whatever, $5 million. If you looked at and if the contract had a limitation of liability clause, and let's assume too that both parties were sued. Because I think you're absolutely right. What would happen is not just the startup would be sued, the big company would be sued. I mean, it depends on the facts, of course, but so in that case, if it were determined that the liability was the liability of the startup's liability would be capped by the limitation of liability in the contract. I think one of the points that you're touching on is indemnity, and we didn't go into that today. That is right.
Yeah, my next question was going to be, what's the difference between indemnification and liability?
Right. That's an excellent question. That's an excellent question, and they're really very different concepts, because the indemnity is when one party agrees to pay the costs of damage or loss for another party. So in the case of a startup company, a very common indemnity is an IP indemnity, an IP infringement indemnity. So if a big company were to get sued by a third party that says, you're using my intellectual property without the right to do so, then the big company would look to the startup, and the startup would, pursuant to the contractual indemnity in the contract, the startup would defend and then cover the costs I mean, it depends on what the indemnity says in the contract, but generally, they would defend and they would pay the costs of that claim if they were not successful in defending it and making it go away.
And then
So that's an indemnity.
All right, and the limitation liability informs you how much you're liable for, right?
But liable to whom? Because, right, if I'm making a contract with a big company here, I'm not making a contract with their customers. What's my liability to their customers?
Right. So the liability only arises if there's a claim. And a claim can come about in a number of ways. So if you think about health rewards, so let's say there was a patient who was harmed, and that was in the course of the big company using the product on behalf of the patient. The patient is likely to make a claim or sue the big company, and the liability would come out of that claim. So it's not like, it's not just by virtue of having a limitation of liability clause, it doesn't create liability. It's only there to say that if there is liability that results from a claim, then it would be limited.
It has to be tied to something that happens under the contract, right? Either the product or an act or an omission by one of the parties.
And so let's say I negotiate this liability limit, right? I say if we agree 1 million, but the big company still gets sued for 5 million, it pays for 4 million. I mean, gets into a settlement, then they have to pay the 4 million if they settle or get.
Yes.
Yes, I love that question because that really crystallizes the effect of a limitation of liability clause, because you're saying the liability could be more. And we agree that it was caused, the damage was caused by a startup company. But with that contractual limitation of liability clause, the company would only be liable up to $1 million, and then the big company is in a sense sharing in the risk because they have to cover the rest.
Yeah. And it works both ways, because the same thing could happen to a small company. They could get sued as a result of something that big company did, and under the limitation liability clause of the contract, big company's liability is limited to, let's say, $2 million, right? So the small company would have to absorb the rest as well. So it's really a clause that's set to limit the risk, the monetary risk of both parties. When it's mutual, in this case, it only covers the big company.
But in this case, if you're a technology provider,
Yeah.
the first scenario is much more likely than the second scenario that you brought up, right? I mean, who would, as me as a technology provider, who would come after me because of something that big company does?
I think that what's common in litigation is that everybody gets sued.
Yeah.
Everybody gets named. You know, everybody in the chain of distribution, and production and development. And in this case, it might, in here, and this is to the point about cloud and hosting, here health rewards would be operating, well, we said it was on-premise, but in the case, sorry, about in a cloud instance, the technology company would be operating the software on behalf of the big company. So everybody would get sued and pulled into it, and it's very costly to just even get out of a claim.
And one last thing, the limitation liability also covers direct claims between the parties. So if so let's say a big company steals our IP, right? And we sue them. The limitation liability tells us how much we can recover from them. So it's not just the third-party lawsuits.
So there are a couple of questions back there.
So you had one slide before where before licensing discussions happen, you get approached by someone who's, a VP in these big companies, and they say, talk to me. So and we're in biologics, so say we've got the VP of Pfizer that's like, just send me a deck, or people just want to come up and have conversations. How do we sort of navigate those?
So there, and I think Julia mentioned this earlier, that there you disclose in your deck only what's already public information. If you feel like you can't get them, and companies like Pfizer are there fastidious about putting NDAs in place. So there's a very good chance that they'll be accommodating and understanding if you say, you know, here you go, please sign this first, and then they'll negotiate the heck out of it with you. But so, you know, alternative A, don't disclose anything confidential. Alternative B, make sure you have the NDA in place.
Yeah. And they'll typically send you their NDA the minute you mention that you want an NDA. Sir?
So you started the case study off by saying that there's a lot of leverage that the big company has. So I can think of a lot of selling strategies that you would use to maybe level the playing field, but what legal strategies are there to not have so much leverage with a big company?
So one of the strategies, and my guess is that these are going to be quasi-business and legal. So one of the best strategies always is to create a competitive bid situation. And that's something that we've participated in often. Another strategy, or maybe in tandem with the competitive bid situation, would be to have your own template ready. And we work with startups to do that. So you have a template that is, and by a template I mean a template contract. If you have a contract form that is truly not just customized for a term sheet, but actually reflects your business model and is well tailored to your business model, is well tailored to the risks that are inherent in your business model. And then you put that out, and if you're lucky, you might have a pharma company or 3 pharma companies interested in your technology. I mean, that's the one that comes to my mind first.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's something else.
Yeah, I mean, I found that, or we found that to be the most successful strategy, because if you can put your terms in front of the company that are truly tailored to the deal, rather than take their 80-page template that has the kitchen sink in there because that's the form they sent to everyone, you already have an advantage from a negotiating perspective.
And there's also, we've worked with many different entrepreneurs who they have ways that they know work. And so I have one client in mind who will never agree to exclusivity because he knows that it'll be damaging to his business in the long run. He'll never do pilots for some of the reasons that we spoke about. I mean, these are things that are, and by knowing what you want and knowing what it is that's suitable for your business, I think you also create leverage too, because you're going to only do business on terms that are suitable for your product and your company. Now, of course, that could leave you sitting in the doghouse by yourself. But I think that a smart entrepreneur like Sue or like the people that we know, they know what's going to work for their company and what kind of terms are going to create success, which in the long run is the formula for success for the big company too.
Yeah.
So the question here is whether we can think of any more examples of companies that didn't do pilots or refused to do that proof of concept stage and still did a successful deal with a big company. And I have to say, and I'm sure Julia has had this experience too, that that is probably more common it's more common not to do the pilot in our world. And that might be partly, who knows, it might be the kind of technology we work with. But it's also I think it's the coming to the lawyer in the early stage of the process when you're negotiating the term sheet, and you can think about these things and you get the benefit of slowing down and thinking about, is this the right journey for my company? Are these the right terms? And so we've seen that very often, actually. We've seen pilots that are successful too. I don't mean to just, I mean, it can work. Any other questions? So the question here was whether it was common to have a release of the source code with a big company.
I've actually never seen a release in the 10 years I've been practicing. I've seen many source code escrow arrangements. I've put many in place. And it really, of course, depends what side of the table you're on. But as a startup, the release conditions are very important. It's really what you make of it.
Right, exactly. And, you know, there are all kinds of little tricks there too, that it's interesting because big companies will often ask for source code escrow, and they'll say in their verbose contracts that the escrow should be put into place within, you know, or upon our request. But of course, they often forget to request it. So, you know, there are lots of ways to mitigate that burden for the startup company.
Yes.
I have a question. So is there anything similar for hardware side compared to the source code escrow? So let's say I have a schematic of something that we design that we goes into our customer's product. So is there some similar common process there?
Yep, so the question here was whether there was anything similar on the hardware side to the source code escrow. So for example, if you were to put the schematics for hardware into escrow, and we have in fact seen that.
Yeah.
There definitely is. You were a great audience. Thank you again so much for having us, and feel free to come up to us if you prefer to ask your questions in a more private way. We'll be here for a few minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.